Good morning, everyone, and thank you for giving up your very valuable time to be here with us today. Although we certainly know the importance of super for your employees, we also know the importance of your time. And we know that it is best fulfilled looking after your business and your business's priorities, not necessarily in fulfilling your superannuation obligations. And this is the purpose of today. How can we assist you to make light work in managing your employees' super and onboarding so you can focus on the more important things? My name is Joshua Van Gestel. I'm the Senior Manager of Strategic Education at Australian Retirement Trust, and I'm very pleased to be hosting today. But I am also very pleased to be joined today by Matt Delagi, who is our Senior Manager of Product and Technology and our guru on what we're discussing. Good morning, Matt. How are you?
Good morning. Thanks, Josh. I'm very well.
Wonderful to have you here. Now, before I do get started, I just wanted to acknowledge that I am presenting today from this place we now call Sydney, traditional home of the Gadigal people of the Aurora Nation, and Matt is presenting from the lands of the Turrbal and Yagara people in the place that we now call Brisbane. I would like to acknowledge the elders of these lands as well as the lands that you're joining us from today, their elders past and present. I'd also like to acknowledge any First Nations people we have with us today. What I'd also like to acknowledge before we begin is that today's presentation is of a general nature only. So we really suggest that after today's session, if there's questions you have or more information you'd like, that you use the resources that we'll be providing to you to get some more insight and to make sure that what we're talking about is fit for purpose. Now, I think it's important to acknowledge, as I said at the opening, I am here from Australian Retirement Trust, and I think it's important to acknowledge that the beam technology that we are showing you today is proudly backed by Australian Retirement Trust. As one of the largest superannuation funds in the industry, and as a fund that assists more employers than any other super fund in the country, we know how important it is to make you and your job around super as easy as possible in supporting your employees. Although we're a relatively new fund by name, we've only existed as Australian Retirement Trust for about 18 months. We are a fund with more than 140 years experience, with over 200,000 employees using us on behalf of more than 2 million members who have entrusted us with $240 billion in their savings for their future. This legacy and this experience is why we have backed Beam, and this is something that Matt will talk to you about in one moment. But just if I can give you some background into why we're even here and why we're discussing this. As we know, nearly 2 years ago, we had the stapling requirements really come into full force. And that meant that where your employees that now start with you make a choice, it's quite an easy process, or no harder than it has previously been. Your employees make a superannuation fund nomination and you follow that through. What stapling added, though, was a new level of really work for you to consider and administer. And that is where an employee doesn't make a choice. What it meant was that depending on what information that employee has, what superannuation fund they're previously with, you could actually go through a number of hurdles and a number of steps in trying to fulfill your new obligations under stapling. So what we wanted to do was to make that process far simpler. The Beam solution is actually designed to do a number of things. And what Matt's going to take you through is our super fund onboarding. And what it does is right there in the name, super fund onboarding for your new employees. It is designed to reduce your paperwork and your administration, to reduce the touch points and rework, and to better manage the way that you look after your super obligations, particularly for you and your employees. So without further delay, Matt, I'll let you take over the screen and take us through the SFO tool.
Wonderful. Thanks very much for the introduction, Josh. I'm just going to share my screen and let me know when you can see. Okay, hopefully you can see that now, Josh. Okay, fantastic. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today, and I really appreciate the time that you're giving us this morning. Effectively, I'll just give you a quick run through of how to use super fund onboarding, so that you get a sense for how easy and how quick it is to actually onboard an employee. So what I'm showing you here first is just how to get into super fund onboarding. This is the employer online dashboard, and for employers that are already using this as their contribution solution, you'll be familiar with what this looks like. To get to super fund onboarding, all you need to do is click on the onboarding tab. We've got a little bit of information there about what super fund onboarding does. And then you can click the launch button, and that's going to open up a new tab for you. So this is the new super fund onboarding solution. And effectively, to start to add a new employee, all you need to do is click add new employee. And effectively, we're going to bring up a little form for us to fill out. For those of you that have lots of employees or want to onboard multiple employees at a time, you can actually use an upload button and a file, and that way you can add a number of employees at the same time. And so as you can see here, there's a few options to choose from. We've got a TFN declaration form, and that will allow you to capture your tax file number from your employee, but it also sends that tax file number declaration across to the ATO, and that can be important in subsequent steps down the track, such as when you might need to make a stapled fund request to the ATO, because the TFN declaration form is one of the ways in which you can create a relationship between you and your employee so that the ATO is able to send you that information. So I'm going to select both of those choices there. And now I'm going to start entering my employee's details, and you might be familiar with this one. So bear with me while I type through this. I am using a demo system, so please don't be concerned that this is going to actually add anyone. A few basic details here. These basic details are lined up with what we need to actually fulfill the following forms. So we're going to start with basic information, and then once we send that off to the employee, they'll have a chance to check that information and make sure it's okay. So a little bit of payroll information here, such as the start date. And basically, that's job done for adding the employee as the first step. So what that's going to do is that's going to invite your employee to use super fund onboarding. So they'll get an email, they'll get a text, and the email will basically give them a link to super fund onboarding that's unique to them, and that will allow them to log into the portal and see what they need to see. So I'm just going to grab that link and jump into the system manually. So bear with me. Okay, excellent. So you can see there that this is effectively the first page that they'll see. They just need to clarify some of the details. And so we're going to authenticate them using their surname and also using their date of birth. And then they pop into the super fund onboarding system. Okay, I've done something wrong there. Apologies, I might just resend the invite, make sure I've got the right information. I may have grabbed the wrong link. Excellent, I see where I've made a typo there, apologies for that. So I'll just fix that up. And grab the link again. Just double checking. Wonderful. There we go. That's just fun one for me. Put me under a little bit of pressure there. So this is the first screen that the employee is going to see. The benefit of this screen is they actually get to validate the information that you've entered for them. And then they can add any missing information here as well. So for example, we can go and add in a middle name here. I'm just going to pop my gender in and then effectively check the details that you've entered on their behalf. And then I can enter my address in here as well. And the benefit of this is that it makes sure that we've got the right information and you've got the right information in your records as well. As you can see from myself, quite easy to make a typo there and change some of the information. So after they've validated their information, we now pop into the TFN declaration screen. And this is really just a digital representation of what you'd otherwise get on the TFND form. So we can see the information here that we're using in the form. The employee has the same types of options that they have on the paper form. I'm just going to enter in a dummy TFN here and then select some of the options to fill in that form. Check the declaration, and that's required by the ATO as part of submitting this form to the ATO, and then submit that TFN declaration. And what that's actually doing is saving that record in your view, but it's also sending that tax file number declaration in real time across to the ATO. And then the final step for the employee is actually the choice form. So you can see here, it's actually loading. What's happening whilst the employees jumped into this screen is we're checking to see if they're a member of Australian Retirement Trust already. And it's really easy for them if we do find an account, we let them know that we have an account and they can stay with us. They can retain Australian Retirement Trust nice and easily. But as you'd expect on a choice form, we have all the options. So they can, for example, choose the default fund. In this case, the default fund is the Australian Retirement Trust. But we also make it easier for the employee to search for their existing fund. So let's say that the employee is a member of QSuper already. So they can just type in the name. They don't need to remember all the things like the USI and the ABN, the things that they'd have to put onto the form. And then they can just select that from the drop down. And then we also grab their member number as required for a valid choice form. And that's really the end of their process. They can go and choose that fund. But what I wanted to show you whilst we're in this screen is actually how easy it is for people to join Australian Retirement Trust from this form. They can look at the benefits of Australian Retirement Trust super savings, for example, and they can choose to become a member in real time. So if they choose to become a member through this process, they certainly don't need to, but we give them access to the PDS, things like the disclosure material and terms and conditions. And if they have with those, they can go and create an account in real time and effectively get a member number straight away. So their process is done now. We can see their dashboard. You can see that everything's complete. And so what I thought I'd do before we finish up is just jump back into your view as an employer. Whoop, didn't like me spending so much time on that form. Let me just log into that employer again. And you can see how that record now shows in the dashboard. And the information that you can see as an employee to then go and do things like make a contribution. I'll just get my password to log in. And effectively, we can go jump into the records that have just been created. And our new employee, Mr. Albanese, we can see all of his details here in the record. We can see that we've sent the tax file declaration across to the ATO, but we haven't got a response yet. This would normally happen quite quickly, but we are using a test system, so sometimes that takes a little bit of time. And we can also see the choice that your employee has made. And so everything that's needed there to go ahead and make a super contribution. So Josh, that's effectively as easy as it is to use super fund onboarding.
Wonderful, Matt. And what I'd like to do just while we've got you on the hook is probably just throw a few questions at you, if that's okay.
Of course.
So can I ask, the first one is probably, we have obviously mentioned a couple of times just with Australian Retirement Trust. What if Australian Retirement Trust isn't my default fund? You know, is this still a tool that I can use as an employer?
Absolutely, Josh. Great question. And it's something that we commonly get. You don't actually need to use Australian Retirement Trust as your default fund to use super fund onboarding. You do need to have an account with Australian Retirement Trust so that you can log in, but you can nominate any default fund that you'd like to use. And you can see here, I'm just showing quickly the default fund screen. You can go and add multiple defaults. You can change your default. And what that will mean is when your employee goes into the choice form, the fund you've nominated as your default here will also show in the choice form as your default fund for your employee to select if they wish.
And maybe as the next obvious question to that is, okay, so that's given me peace of mind there, but what about the cost? Is there a cost that is associated with this, particularly if, let's say, Australian Retirement Trust isn't my default, for example?
No cost at all, Josh. So effectively, you can use super fund onboarding for free. As long as you have an account, you can log in and send as many invites as you'd like to your employees. It doesn't matter if you're a small or large employer either.
Wonderful. And probably, mate, two really quick additional questions, if I could. So obviously, a very big part of this system is that it takes out or takes away some of that communication that employers have to have with their new employees. This is doing it for them. What happens if an employer has gone through this process, but an employee hasn't picked up their end of the deal before the employer is having to make their super contribution?
Fantastic question, Josh. Ultimately, there's a couple of things that we can do here. There is a function within super fund onboarding that allows you to send a reminder to your employee. So certainly as you're approaching a contribution deadline, we'll send a reminder to an employee, but you can also trigger a new invite to your employee if you'd like to remind them to finish off the process. But importantly, what we're building to make it even easier in the future is where your employee doesn't get back to you in time, we're going to integrate the stapled fund request service from the ATO into super fund onboarding very soon. It's something that we're working on at the moment. And what that means is instead of having to log into the ATO's portal to go and make a stapled fund request directly with them, you'll be able to fulfill your obligations within super fund onboarding, whether or not your employee actually gives you a choice. So we're really looking forward to releasing that feature in the near future.
And I think, Matt, that actually goes to the point that this is something that we've really committed to and that it is constantly being developed and enhanced. And I think that just shows our commitment to it. And I'm glad there's a way that we can get around if Albo's a bit slack. Probably the last question I'd ask you, and I think it's probably really pertinent at this point. All looks good. We've given a taste of this, but what do I do if I want some additional information, if I want a better look at this? What resources are available to me?
Fantastic, Josh. So we've got some great resources available on our website. We are going to send everyone links to those. You probably received some of those as part of the invite to this session. So we have things like frequently asked questions. We have a fact sheet about super fund onboarding. And importantly, for those employers who don't currently have access to super fund onboarding, some great instructions about how you can easily register for an account and get access to super fund onboarding in real time. It only takes 5 minutes to set up an account and get access to the tool.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Matt. And I'm not going to make any comments about the two employees being ScoMo and Albo. And I was a bit concerned you knew address details and things so easily off the top of your head.
Well, fortunately for Albo, Josh, you might not have noticed, but they've got the same address in our system. So it seems like the lodge is being shared from Albo to still with ScoMo.
With Toto the dog thrown in for good measure. So if I can just, firstly, Matt, thank you so much for your time and for taking us through that. Apologies for a couple of the gremlins that popped up, including I couldn't take myself off mute when Matt was asking me a question. So apologies for that. But the other thing I'd just like to point out is that as we've talked about systems to assist employers, including Beam and super fund onboarding, are evolving. And it's important to note that legislation and your obligations is also evolving. As we heard in the budget about a month or so ago, the government has announced that superannuation obligations will go from being a quarterly requirement to a payday requirement. And it means that things like the SFO tool are going to become much, much more important to help you to really fulfill your obligations, but to be able to fulfill them quickly. And as Matt has shown, even when you've got a new employee coming on, when your obligations are probably at their most complicated in regard to super, the SFO tool tries to make that easy. And so in a couple of years, when we see payday super come into force, we would actually see your obligations also be much easier at that time. So on that note, I would like to thank you all again for your valuable time this morning. We hope that this has given you some food for thought and some opportunity to think further and engage with us further. So as Matt said, you will be receiving additional information from us. Please do explore that, and we look forward to speaking to you very soon and helping you out with meeting your obligations simply so you can focus on the more important stuff running your business.